welcome back to our video podcast of Dozers to Drywall. I know we've been out a couple of weeks now for the Christmas holidays and such, but we finally got through all of that and got back here to Illinois Institute of Technology. And up until now, the first 3 or 4 podcasts we had, I had guest speakers, and we kind of showcased some of the things that we do with those guest speakers. This particular podcast is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to talk to you about a concept and an idea I've had for many, many years, and part of my observations. It's called the Construction Consortium, and it's a way to fund construction research at the university. Before I get into that, I want to talk a little bit about my background, because I haven't mentioned that before, and I think it kind of leads into where we're going with this. Back in 1975, I graduated from college and went into the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in the active Army. And I was in the Army for 12 years until I suffered a spinal cord injury and I had to leave. And but in that time, I was very, very fortunate, and I was assigned 3 different battalions that their main mission was construction. So I spent my whole time in the Army doing construction work, came to Chicago to advise another reserve unit that planned construction work all over the world. And I was very fortunate. And while I was here, I actually originally had a psychology degree, and which is another story, how I ended up an Army engineer with a psychology degree. But I went to school at Illinois Institute of Technology during the week and got my undergraduate degree, found out about the spinal cord injury. They put me out of the Army, and I stayed here. So my first job out of the Army was I built a wastewater treatment plant on the south side of Chicago. And then I found a job with a consulting firm for about 2 years, where I went all over the country and audited construction companies and their books for the bonding companies. And basically, these companies would be bankrupt, and we'd have a 5-man team. And after the first 6 months, I was the team chief for the last 18 months on that. Tremendous experience when you go and get to see, say in a year period, 52 weeks, you see maybe 40 bankrupt companies and 40 sets of books. So even though it was only a couple of years, it was a tremendous education. After that, I got a job with Harza Engineering became the chief of project controls eventually. But one of my specialties from in the Army was scheduling. And I had built the first computerized schedule for the Army. And eventually, when Primavera came out, I became, for the Army, a beta tester for them. And as such, when I got out into the working world, I still did a bunch of estimating and scheduling in different jobs in different places. At Harza, still about 6 years, I think, and I did go all over the world. I went to 20-some countries, and I would go to basically hydroelectric jobs or irrigation projects, and would teach the engineers in those countries how to use Primavera, how to use cost accounting systems, and how to track budgets and such. Again, a tremendous experience, because I got to see many countries and how many different engineering places worked. And in the meantime, I went to school at night to get a law degree, and actually got a law degree plus a second certificate or a law degree, however you want to look at it, in international law. I did that because I thought I'd need that to become the project manager on one of our big projects. It turned out that there were corporate things that happened, and all of us in the construction management division ended up losing our jobs. And at that point, I had just gotten my law degree, so I ended up getting hired by CNA Surety, at the time, the second largest bonding company in the United States. And I was the chief engineer, but I also did a whole lot of lawyer things. And again, I would travel maybe 40 weeks a year to different places where there were bankrupt engineering firms, construction firms. And the bonding company had guaranteed the construction of whatever it was, a school, a highway. I would relet those contracts, and if need be, I'd hire attorneys and I'd litigate what I needed to. It was an excellent opportunity again for me, because in those 7 years, I got sued 3 times a week. So, I've been sued, 1,000 times or so, and that gave me the opportunity to read legal documents in many different states in many different ways, and to manage that litigation. And so I got an entire career's worth of legal experience in those few years. Out of there, I got a job with the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District here in Chicago. And for those of you who don't know, that's the agency that reversed the river back in 1890 to 1900. It covers all the wastewater treatment in the entire Cook County area. And we had, I think, 7 major sewer plants. One of them is the largest in the world. And I ran construction, and more than anything, I ran payments, but I was also the claims administrator. So again, on the management side, but from an owner's perspective this time, instead of from a contractor's perspective. Almost all that time, for the last 38 years, I taught here at IIT at night as an adjunct professor, and I did all this other experience. I had retired and I worked for a consulting firm on a part-time basis and still taught about 3 years ago. Dr. David Arditi left as the director of construction to retire, and the university came and asked me to come on, and I've been here for 3 years full-time. Part of my responsibility as the director of construction programs is to run the business side of this, to get students to find out what programs work and figure out how we're going to run the business of educating people at a university. I must say I find it interesting. I still teach 5 or 6 classes a year at the same time, but that's my primary job here, and that's the reason I started this video blog. I'm trying to at least act younger than my years, but it's an outreach thing, but it's also an educational thing that I hope to use in that. All that being said, one of the problems that I ran into in my time at the MWRD was, for a while, I was supposed to be finding research money. And there really wasn't a lot of research money out there, at least not for construction. And when I got here, as you probably know, a university operates on research money. I kind of view it as a bit of a pyramid, and in that pyramid we have hundreds of undergraduate students, we have dozens and dozens of graduate students, and then at the top of the pyramid, we have our PhD students, and those PhD students are funded from the PhD professors who get research money. And I think the whole theory is upside down, and that's kind of what I'm here to talk to you about today. I really would appreciate feedback. I know a few of my friends out there are fellow professors or former professors, and I'm sure some of you also are, and some of you are adjuncts in that. Some of you went through this process. But I view the funding of research in the construction management field that universities follow, I call it the rich uncle theory. And that is, we're looking for a rich uncle. And we want that rich uncle to give us lots of money and let us kind of go off and be academics and work on something. Most of the time, if we're given money, there is something specific that the agency that gave us the money wants us to do. You know, in old times, people had sponsors. My slide here, I see that Mozart's sponsor was the Archbishop of Salzburg. And Howard Carter, who found King Tut's tomb, his sponsor was the 5th Earl of Carnarvon. Here in academia, for 75 years or more, the rich uncle has typically been Uncle Sam. However, this research money is based upon what Uncle Sam thinks is important this year. In World War II and in the Cold War, obviously weapons systems were important. Nuclear science was important. The space race had aerospace was important, and there was millions and millions that the federal government would give to universities to do research with. In my time, when I graduated in 75, the environment wasn't a big deal, but about 5 years later, President Jimmy Carter created and invented the Environmental Protection Agency, and originally the EPA was a functional type of government agency and handed out billions of dollars and looked at things like remediation of Love's Park in New York and those types of things. That did shift several years later, where the EPA stopped being a disperser of funds and became a regulatory police agency, so to speak. So that money kind of dried up, and we saw across the entire university spectrum that that money dried up, and environmental departments were combined with other departments and such. It's kind of interesting then what we've developed as our culture for 75 years in this research zone. And that culture is that universities have huge administrative staffs. I looked up an organization called the NCURA, which is the Council of Research Administrators. And they say they've got 10,000 members in different universities, and the different titles they have is research administrator, grant manager, sponsored program officer, pre-award specialist, post-award specialist, compliance officer. And those offices have administrative people. Whether you call them clerks or secretaries or the old term typists. That's an interesting term. I don't think we've had typists ever since we had word processors, but that's a huge infrastructure to manage all this. And the researchers themselves, the PhDs that are either under tenure or looking for tenure, they're constantly scanning large government databases, looking for money, looking for somebody that wants something done. And, it's oftentimes not their dead specialty that they learned in, but it's somewhat related. And so they put in the proposals to the government, and then they come back. In some cases, there are private companies that need some kind of work done and will look for some kind of research. But we don't see that very often in the construction management field. As a matter of fact, change the page here. I think the model that works for construction management is I call the bunch of cousins. Instead of a rich uncle, we need a bunch of cousins that can all help out in figuring out what our research should be, and then being able to help us fund some of that. Part of the reason for this is the construction industry is largely a decentralized industry. We don't have a central government. The government's the largest procurer of construction of all the different people out there in the industry, but we don't have a large government agency that's the Department of Construction and trying to find bigger and better ways. Each department of the government kind of does their own thing. And so when we look at what we do, and I think I may have said this in one of our earlier podcasts, but what we do in the construction business is we create projects. And projects are temporary organizations. We want an ad hoc organization. And they're created for one specific job, and in doing so, they actually are tailored also. We task organize, we tailor our organization with whatever subs or specialties we need, and we don't go hiring a bunch of other subcontractors we don't need. As a result, I think one way to envision a construction project is somewhat like a flash mob. That you hear one instrument in the crowd and everybody looks, and they start to look that way and go over, and pretty soon there's a second instrument, and a third, and a fourth. Before you know it, there's an entire band or an orchestra throughout the area playing this music, and then it ends and it disperses and disappears. Very much like what a construction project is. It's interesting in this environment that almost all modern discoveries that we use in construction management came about by somebody on one of these projects had a need. And they saw some new technology, some ability, and they went and did something to create something new. In the business world, we call such people champions. But these were champions on the job site, and as they looked at it, they said, well, with my iPad, I can take pictures and I can have the GPS location and send it to everybody in the group immediately so we can look at a problem. When we looked at documents, in the days that we used to do paper documents, it's quite typical in any project to have dozens of 6-drawer filing cabinets full of submittals and the plans and the specs and all kinds of stuff that we do. On my hydroelectric projects, on one of them I can remember, I had about 30 million documents. It was enough documents to fill a warehouse of shelves about 8 feet tall. And when we got done, we had to catalog all those documents. They went into a repository inside the powerhouse for history. In that environment, somebody says, well, gee whiz, let's make a computerized system here. The very few first computerized document systems I worked with, we typed up the documents and then we scanned them as a picture into there, and then we would put metadata and coding on it so we could go back and find it. That evolved over the years to systems that you can type the letter in directly, it saves keywords, or it will scan for keywords. So today, we have cloud-based document control systems. The same thing happened in scheduling for Primavera. 2 individuals working on a job site said, gee, it'd be nice if we could automate the schedule so we could update it and look at it, and they created, I think it was P2 on a mainframe. When they got done, they said to their bosses, we ought to sell this. And the bosses said, no, we're a construction company. And so those 2 individuals said, well, can we have the rights to it? And they gave them the rights, and they went off and formed the Primavera company. We look at the same thing in the CAD drawing area. The earliest CAD drawings came off of hand drawings and went into what was called a CAD/CAM system. My one brother was one of the very first draftsmen who was taught this system and taught how to create milled machines in that. It's direct from the drawings. And it didn't take long where they put these drawings onto screens and controlled the milling machine in that. Out of that grew the current Autodesk CAD systems. And again, somebody there said, well, we got this thing working, let's go ahead. And it developed more out of the project, not from a university, not from somebody saying, this would be a really good idea. So when we look at that, what else is on my list there? And sometimes in these situations, the innovators that created this, the champions, they don't market it. They say, well, I got that done and I need to go on to the next job. And I found the solution. And most engineers are solution-based. If we have to learn something and fix something, we go and do it. And once it's built, we move on to the next thing. So there's many things in there that kind of have been lost over time too. I call it the bunch of cousins model because I say your mom says you should see what your cousin Michael is doing. So that's the basic model. Well, I haven't gotten to the model yet. But basically, the model is a group funding model. If we have a bunch of cousins that are talking all the time on some type of social media, if we create our own social media and call it the Construction Consortium, but we talk to them, we can match up people in the AEC business that need problems solved and our talent in the university. The cousins in the university can talk to the cousins in the business world, find out their specific problem, and see how we can take care of this. In this model, when somebody identifies the problem, we could have the one-on-one model where the business says, I have this person who's really interested in getting their PhD, and we also have this problem. As we solve it, is there any way that he or she can work on this problem that we'll fund? And that's a model that I am trying to use with a couple places right now. So that's the one-on-one model, solving a single company's specific problem on a project or in an operation. However, what I envision more is the group funding model, where somebody says, I have this problem and I'm able to put up I'm able to fund this problem at a certain dollar amount, 100,000, and the PhD student or the university is able to say, we can research that for $250,000. And other people in the consortium say, well, I'd like a part of that. I'd like some of the use of that product. When you solve that, we have the same problem. And we generate the funding in a group fund. This is the many-to-one version. And the Construction Consortium that I'm thinking about somehow takes that. It's not unlike a real estate agent that matches up buyers and sellers, or any other service that matches up people with different needs, so whether it's eBay looking for sellers and buyers, or whatever else it is. One of the criticisms I've had from fellow professors on this is that when we do research in pure science, we find stuff we never thought we'd find. And I kind of made a note, the vulcanization of rubber by Goodyear, or the background frequency of the universe that was found by Bell Labs, are things that nobody was looking for, and they found it. And I guess there's some truth to that, but I don't think that any university manages to get research grants from anybody that says, well, just look for what you want as pure science and see what you find and get back to me. I think these incidental discoveries are just that, incidental discoveries. Some of the problems that we would need to look at in this is we would have to have some type of a research agreement where we agree to share the intellectual property rights for the people that are funding this and have the problem in the work. And, you know, that can be any one of a dozen different ways. With my law hat on, I think of different ways this can be done. But it's important if we build something for somebody, another company, that they have the full right to use it and solve their problem. And yet we have the right to use what we got out of it to solve other problems. So there is that issue that I never completely worked for, but I'm aware of it. I think the biggest issue I have is, and many of you that are out there have in the working world know this, is when we're on construction sites, we're always running against the clock. It kind of reminds me of an old movie called Gumball Rally, where one of the characters is a race car driver and gets in this Maserati and tears off the rear view mirror. The guy that owns the Maserati says, "My God, that's $1 million car." And he says, the first rule of Italian driving, what's behind you does not matter. Well, I've always kind of thought the construction's kind of like that when you're out on that job site on a day-to-day basis or on a week-to-week meeting basis, that you kind of forget about what's happened. Now, as a claims attorney, yeah, we get back to that and we argue that. But in doing our jobs, of getting concrete and forms and steel on top of those forms and that building closed in before winter and then doing the utilities in it so that by spring it's ready to go. Those are all time constraints. And as you all know, we build buildings and we build roads in 4 dimensions, in the X, Y, Z, and on the clock. So university researchers don't really understand that business culture. Timely performance is required and expected. Businesses look for a return on investment. Is this going to be reasonable? Are we going to get out of it what we need to get? And that's just part of capitalism in the business world. The other thing is that businesses like progress reports. Just like on our construction jobs, we have weekly or bi-weekly progress meetings where everybody comes and sits down and goes through them. And on some of the bigger projects I've been on, those happen to be like all-day affairs with lunch in the middle. When you're running a billion-dollar hydroelectric job with 8 construction contracts and the owner's sitting there, it would take us a whole day to go through each of those contracts with those contractors. Most of us on our job sites, our job meetings are really not too long, especially if you're using a document control system that creates your agenda for you, and you can stick to the agenda. But researchers aren't necessarily tuned in to that frequent update, and it's the kind of thing that if we have a customer from the Construction Consortium, then there needs to be communication and reports. It's not a laissez-faire type of research. That's most of the notes that I had on this. Pointed out, kind of going through this, the idea is that our business is very decentralized. companies operate, even the biggest companies here are operating out on their own, and they look for problem solutions, and they tend to be problem solvers, but sometimes we get into things. Right now, I got several different companies that I know people and have visited, and we have talked at length about AI. Well, it's interesting. Almost nobody seems to know what AI is. Almost nobody in the construction business seems to know when and how they're really going to use this. I mean, AI may reduce a clerk at the McDonald's at the counter. It may speed something up, but most of us see AI as a tool, much like the days when we gave up our slide rules for calculators. And so far, what I've seen in it and gotten from it, it's done that type of thing. My own personal approach to it is that the day when I can hand the computer an entire set of specs, and 10 minutes later they give me the complete submittal log that's going to occur for that job, that might be something functional, but right now we don't have that. So I know there's people out there with this, and one of the things I've noticed is we created our own separate email, but I haven't seen any emails in that D2D. So we're going to have to figure out and put in the subtitles here, how for you people to get in contact with us. So far we've been using just messages on LinkedIn, but to take some feedback on this, I'm going to need some feedback through the system. So my production assistant here is going to put something up on the screen that lets us get some feedback from you. And other than that, Happy New Year. Glad you're here. I hope to have some of our alums in some of the near future speeches. I got some guest lecturers coming for some of my classes, and I'd like to have them talk with us. And in our feedback, if there's something we can cover, something we can look at, a problem that's out there, I'd like to look at that too. So I think that's pretty well it. Happy New Year.